when do you know is the right time to pivot an idea?
Within a 2-month period or so, you should be able to tell if an idea is going to work or not, or whether it's going to be worth it to invest more time.
Hi, Ayan. How's it going?
Doing great. How about you, man?
Doing good. To start off, do you mind just giving me a 1-minute elevator pitch on what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. My name's Ayan. I'm co-founder at Dealwise. We are the best way to find an M&A advisor for your business. Basically, the best M&A advisor for your business is somebody who's sold a company similar to yours. We've spent the past, 2 to 3 months helping software businesses and, tech-enabled service businesses get acquired.
That's really cool. But do you mind just giving me a little brief background on yourself and how you stumbled upon this idea?
For a bit of context, my co-founder and I initially, worked at Robinhood. And we went through the YC batch back in winter of 2023, initially as an AI infra idea. And during our time, though, we realized that, it was a bit too early for the idea that we were working on. But we experienced one of the companies in our batch going through the M&A process. They actually sold to an insurance company. And the thing that we realized is that there just isn't a lot of information available for founders that are looking to get acquired. There's plenty of content that you can read and learn about when it comes to, doing sales or marketing or, hiring. Nobody really prepares you for finding a buyer for your business. And so we helped one of our batchmates go through this process. And so we realized that, there's a lot of gaps here.
So I was doing some reading on Dealwise and yourself, and you kind of talked about it there. You guys went through a pivot in the YC batch, but I guess I really want to understand, when do you know is the right time to pivot an idea? You said you guys were a little too early, but I imagine you went into YC very, very excited about your initial idea, and it must have been hard to move off of it.
That's honestly a great question. Knowing what is the right time to pivot is honestly more of an art than a science. But I can tell you how we figured it out in our case. So what we were working on before this idea was kind of like Plaid, but for AI startups. So if an AI startup wants to connect to their customers, Google Drive or Zendesk and Confluence, so that they can ingest that data for, to power customer support or some other kind of chatbot, that's where our solution would come in and let you authenticate with your customers' Google Drive, for example. And the thing that we learned is that we were able to get a couple of customers that loved our product, startups that were doing AI customer support. They use our product all the time, give us great feedback. But at some point we hit a wall where we realized there's just not enough customers that fit that profile. Most of, the startups building AI chatbots didn't really have customers themselves. And so solving this problem was not a huge problem for them. And also, they couldn't pay because they didn't have customers, right? And so there's a couple of reasons why you would need to pivot, right? So one of them is the one that I mentioned, which is you're just a bit too early for the market. You managed to get a couple of customers, but you've kind of just hit a ceiling, and it's going to be a while before, that market is going to mature. Another example is where you're just not getting any customers, right? You're talking to potential customers, you're telling them about your solution and talking to them about their problem, and they tell you like, hey, yeah, that totally sounds useful. We have some other priorities. We'll get to this maybe like in a couple weeks. And then they just keep pushing it back over and over. And that's when you know that you're not really solving a hair on fire problem for anybody. And so in that case, it's really obvious that you should pivot. There's also other cases such as you've managed to find a problem that people have, but the solution just isn't scalable, right? And if your goal is to reach, venture scale, then you got to change your idea. If not, you're okay with running, a lifestyle business, then that's okay. Yeah, I mean, before I went through the whole startup journey, I didn't realize how common it was. And at the end of the day, it's because most ideas don't work out for one reason or another.
YC's always pitching, and for those of you listening, YC's the premier startup software tech incubator in the world. They get the top startups every single year, and coming out of their batch, people raise millions and millions of dollars. and they're always talking about this idea of pivoting. And you mentioned why you pivoted, but could you really bring me through that mentality? Because when you have this idea that you so strongly believe in, I imagine it's not just 5 customer calls later, I need to pivot. So really, how long is that process? Like, YC, this accelerator program is about 3 months long. How long did it take you to realize this idea is great, but it's not scalable like we want it to be?
Within a 2-month period or so, you should be able to tell if an idea is going to work or not, or whether it's going to be worth it to invest more time. You can't really figure it out in just like a week or so. You can't just send a bunch of emails, and if nobody responds, oops, I guess, the idea doesn't work. You need to kind of go through the entire rep, right? The entire cycle of come up with the idea, identify who your customers are, do some user interviews with them, actually kind of build out an MVP. And this is where, being, strong technically is useful, because you can condense the MVP building down to a shorter period of time, and then actually like make sales, right? If you haven't made a single sale, then odds are you haven't gone far enough into the idea, because you don't really learn much until you get somebody to pay money for the thing that you've built. And that's where you get most of the learnings, actually, is like once you actually have customers paying you and using your product, that's when you can actually draw conclusions around whether it's going to work or what's working and what's not.
Earlier this week, you told me you guys are going through another small pivot on Dealwise right now. How many pivots have you guys gone through?
Good question. This latest one, I'd call it more of an iteration than, a full-on pivot. A full-on, hard pivot, I think we've maybe gone through maybe 2 or 3. But even once you've settled in on a problem, so, in our case, we've settled in on the problem of helping, business owners get acquired, you still have to iterate on the solution, right? Because maybe you have the wrong solution. Initially, we had a 2-sided marketplace, so just buyers and sellers. The problem that we realized with that is that sellers typically want a broker who's going to A, answer a lot of questions for them, and B, reach out to strategic buyers, because strategic buyers, these are, your Googles, your Apples, essentially your bigger companies that have like a corp dev team. Those people are not going to sit on a marketplace all day. And so it became pretty clear that you need a broker in the mix. So our response to that was, okay, what if we also act as the broker? And we acted as the broker for a couple of deals, and we have a couple LOIs in progress right now, scheduled to close and become closed deals in the next 2 to 3 months. And the thing that we realized there is that, that part is not scalable, right? The act of, being an M&A advisor, it's fundamentally a services business. You're doing a service, and that's not something you can scale up with software. Because of that realization, we moved to the model that we're currently at, which is where we actually match you with the best M&A advisor for your business. And so you could maybe call these pivots, but at the end of the day, the problem statement is still the same. The solution is what changes. And as long as you are providing value to customers and, getting things done, you're going to keep getting those learnings, and you're going to keep, iterating on the solution. Hopefully you're not changing the problem every time, though. That's where, you kind of lose out on your learnings.
From what you're saying, it sounds like a pivot and an iteration is different than changing ideas, as long as you're staying within the same problem. You're still tackling the same problem, just in a different way. Is that what you're trying to get at?
I'd say so, right? Because you're keeping those customer learnings, your learnings about the pain point. You're just changing your approach, right? And I think in some cases, maybe you'll get lucky, or you already understand this space very deeply. Maybe you'll get to that solution, the ideal solution, on the first try. But odds are you're going to need to go through a couple of those reps where, come up with the idea, do some user interviews, build and then sell, and then take the learnings from there and kind of loop. I think the lean startup is like kind of a variation of this, but yeah, I think a lot of these startup frameworks that you'll hear about are all kinds of, just variations of this.
Oh, you see a lot of startups go through this process all the time. In your experience, what percentage of startups in your network, startups you've seen, have gone through at least one pivot, just to give some sort of context to everyone out there?
Honestly, right, I think maybe the better question is like, how many haven't, right? I've maybe talked to 2 or 3 that have just like, maybe like never pivoted, right? Maybe 3 to 5 startups that I've talked to that have never pivoted. But outside of that, everyone's gone through it at least once.
Out of thousands, I'm sure they've talked to. Kind of diving into this point a little further, when is it time to give up and stop pivoting, stop iterating?
You're saying like, stop pivoting, stop iterating, and just, like shut down, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, that really comes down to, in some cases, the founders just get tired. And honestly, like the iterating part is not something you can really, decide to just stop doing. I think even if you're like a really big, even if you're Meta, you still have to think about what the next iteration is going to be, whether it's, VR or something else. And so I think you have to kind of, on some level, accept that you're constantly going to be iterating as like your customers change, your markets change. You need to keep growing to the next level. And in some cases, right, if you decide kind of tired, and that's a pretty common reason why, companies will shut down, is if, at the end of the day, like burnout, right? That's a really common reason why companies will shut down. Another one is, they just kind of blew up, internal politics, co-founder disputes, things along those lines.
So I was looking at your profile, and you've gone through YC now 2 times. So that means the first idea, I guess you could say failed, or you moved on. In your experience, why did you make that decision? Because that's kind of the theme of what we're talking about right now.
When we went through YC that first time, my friends from college and I, we did a startup, and we all kind of agreed on some level that we wanted to kind of get some work experience, understand what businesses want. Because the thing that we learned was that it was pretty difficult to understand, get a good grasp on like B2B ideas, and if you've never actually worked full-time at a company before.
I do want to get back to that point about whether to go into a startup or work full-time, but just to stay on the same topic, what are the emotions you go through, right? Because you're a founder, it's essentially your baby. So how do you emotionally get over that hurdle that maybe this one's not it, and you keep faith for the future?
You're saying like when you like shut down?
Yeah, exactly. When you shut down the first time, what are the emotions you're going through?
Not happiness, like it's definitely tough. You're, a little bit of a defeat, but at the end of the day, right, there's really not much you can do. Like really, all you can do is just pack it up and try again another day. Look at how a lot of the biggest companies got started. So it's a lot of, second-time founders.
After you go through YC and you end up quitting this first idea of yours, you go to Robinhood. What is your mentality going into the company? Is it, oh, maybe I'll make a great career out of myself, or it's, I'm just looking for my next idea? And maybe the experience and what I'm learning at Robinhood, one of the fastest-growing fintech companies, will teach you a lot.
I think when you're at a fast-growing startup, you get to see a lot of the challenges, right? A lot of the problems that pop up. If you're at a much larger company that's more, stable or stagnant, you don't necessarily get to see those gaps. And one of those was actually customer support at Robinhood, where I don't know if you remember the whole, GameStop thing, but, for the couple months after that, there was just like a flood of customer support tickets. And so when we started working on, the initial idea for this startup, we were kind of adjacent to that problem space.
Basically, you're in and out, trying to find your next idea. You find the problem, you solve the problem. So they're really just nights and weekends. You're building out this side hustle of yours. When do you make the leap then?
My co-founder Jason and I, we definitely did, a little bit of nights and weekends for a couple months. But yeah, the leap, to be honest, we made towards the end of, towards the end of 2022. At that point, we had been kind of working together for a little while. We were both, second-time founders at this point. We realized we can kind of build things, and we can kind of get distribution.
So is it more just a feeling, or was your product finished, or did you have some letter of intents from customers? What was the spark?
We definitely had a couple LOIs, but in hindsight, LOIs don't mean that much. But so I think really what matters more is just your intent, right? Like what are you looking for? And like, how do you feel? And like, do you feel like you can kind of make this work? And so I think that was really more of a factor than like, whatever LOIs we have had, because in hindsight, right, those LOIs didn't matter too much in the end.
So then you leave this job, you're working on this product with your co-founder. You then apply to YC. Now, as the second time, you've already done YC. Why do you apply to YC again? Did you feel you learned everything before?
Oh, one of the most valuable parts of YC is actually the advice. When you're going through this process of like ideation and testing ideas, advice is really valuable because they really tailor their advice to your team specifically. And they also just have a lot of data around like, what kinds of ideas have like worked in the past, what kinds of strategies have worked in the past. I remember, for example, one of their suggestions when we were working on the data connectors idea was to go open source. And it turned out that was actually a really great distribution strategy.
The YC application just happened a little bit ago, and I was actually seeing this alternate view on YC where YC is almost very selfish and doesn't care much about the founder, where they take all these founders and tell them the analogy was keep digging towards the center of the earth until you hit either rock or gold. But at the same time, that's not the best deal for the founder potentially, because like you were saying, maybe it's time to jump ship way earlier, move on to something that's better. Whereas YC might tell you to keep building.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you're doing a startup, you're digging for gold, right? So I don't think it's necessarily like, YC pushing you to like dig for gold. And I think typically it's, as a founder, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for essentially, PMF, right? That's what gold is, right?
Staying on this YC trend, what is the worst aspect of YC? What's the best aspect of YC? And lastly, what's one thing you would change about YC? 3 questions in one, but hopefully they can all be kind of related.
Best is like, by far, honestly, yeah, like both the advice and just like the network are like pretty unparalleled, where if you're getting advice from a lot of startup experts, it's typically not very good and not very tailored to what you're doing. But, when it comes to YC partners, they actually do an amazing job of that. And then, the network is really important because you're talking to your batchmates that are kind of going through the same struggle with you, the same process. And so you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And you can also, and if there's any, specific problem that you're trying to solve, whether it's, a people problem or, a technical problem, you can probably like find the answer to the YC network somehow. Worst, I'd say definitely like, I think a little like on the shorter side, which I think is both good and bad. Right, like the 3 months before demo day, it can definitely mean that like you have like a really limited amount of time to prove something out before you hit demo day. But on the flip side, right, that can also be a good forcing function, because now you realize that like, okay, I need to prove that something's working by like the next 2 months, which I think that's just useful for a startup in general, because you actually always have that timeline, right? You already have that timeline of like, hey, like at some point, the money is going to run out and I have to have something that's going to work.
Last part was the change. What would you change about it?
Make it maybe even like a recurring thing, right? Like I think that kind of experience is really valuable, even when you're like further along in your startup journey.
And one thing that really comes out of demo day for Y Combinator, YC in particular, is everyone gets a lot of funding, after demo day. It's like, why you grind so hard to get to a demo day? But what is your thought process? You alluded to this earlier, talking about building a lifestyle business versus building a business that could be venture backable, because your goal then is to make $1 billion business, even when we $10 million and you have 100% ownership. Sounds pretty good to a lot of people.
So, I mean, that's really just a trade-off that you kind of have to make. And I think if you are trying to build a lifestyle business, like you can actually just bootstrap that, right? You can kind of be an indie hacker. I think Peter Levels like does a pretty good job of this, where he kind of has like a bunch of businesses that are each making like a couple $100,000. And then that leads to a pretty good lifestyle business versus, the VC path is different, right? You're shooting for like kind of the $1 billion outcome, and like the probability is low, but, expected value might be, not too far off from like the other path, because you're specifically, filtering for ideas that can kind of get to that scale. And to be honest, building a bit of business is just a lot of work, no matter what you're doing. And so my thought process is, if you're going to go through the struggle of building a business, why not pick the idea or direction that's going to lead you to the biggest possible outcome?
I do love Bubbles. Follow him on Twitter. Big fan of what he's working on. Always has a lot of cool ideas. Always inspires a lot of people. Kind of moving in a similar way. Why are you so inspired to build? You can easily go get a job at Google, any of the FAANG companies. Very, very cushy job, very safe job with your background, with your experience. But why do you just have this desire to continue building?
There's just like a different kind of satisfaction of, actually creating value from nothing. Yeah, the other side is like you also get to see the value that you're creating, because you're actually talking to the customers that you're building for. You get to see the value that you're creating versus at, a bigger company that you're many degrees like separated from that.
Completely agree. I think the satisfaction from building is unlike anything you can get from a normal job. And you kind of have to be crazy to do it, given the failure rate's up there at like 95%.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think there's like, a certain type of person that kind of self-selects.
My last question that I ask everyone I interview, has there been any routine that you've maintained throughout the years, throughout your entire experience building?
Getting up earlier, like early morning, I think pretty valuable for, just kind of getting a head start on the day. So I think that's maybe the only like kind of routine I can think of.
Early morning gets the word, right? Isn't that the saying?
Exactly.
Ayan, I really appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you for coming on Invested. But with this, my name is Sahil.
My name is Ayan.
And this is Uninvested. Thank you.
This is a personal video. Any views or opinions represented in this video are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations we may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. The views expressed are for entertainment purposes only and not to be misinterpreted as actionable investment advice.